Hello, I'm Nancy Merritt, and I'm the Vice Chancellor for Alumni Relations here at the University of Pittsburgh. Thank you all for joining us today. This year's homecoming is obviously very different from previous homecomings. This year, we're coming to you and are helping you hail from home. The Alumni Association made the choice to go virtual so that we can all do our part to stay safe and still share our Pitt pride. Thank you for adapting along with us in the PAA since we've had to shift to more online engagement. Something that has not changed this year is the content and quality of our events. We are still able to bring you a lineup of lively, engaging speakers, concerts, and presentations. And today, we are so honored to have Chancellor Gallagher with us to present his university update. After his remarks, the Chancellor has agreed to join me for a question and answer session, so please stay to hear his responses to the questions that you all submitted when you registered. During the presentation, you may also submit questions by clicking the Ask a Question button on your screen. It's in the upper right-hand corner. If there's time at the end, we will also try to get to some of these questions. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Chancellor Pat Gallagher. Chancellor Gallagher is the University of Pittsburgh's 18th Chancellor. He oversees a community of more than 34,000 students and 14,000 faculty and staff members across 5 distinct campuses, all working to advance Pitt's mission to make the world a better place through knowledge, learning, and scholarship. Chancellor Gallagher holds a bachelor's degree in physics and philosophy from Benedictine College in Kansas, and we're also proud to call him a Pitt alumnus. He received his PhD in physics from Pitt. Ladies and gentlemen, Chancellor Pat Gallagher.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, everybody. Happy homecoming. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today and to continue our new homecoming tradition of getting a chance to get together and provide an update on what's happening here at the University of Pittsburgh. It's great to have these traditions. Obviously, part of the tradition wasn't doing this virtually, sitting in our pajamas or wherever you happen to be right now doing this remote. But like everything that's happening today, a big part of it is being agile and flexible and adjusting to the circumstances. In this case, the circumstances being the need to protect everybody from this ongoing pandemic. So I hope you'll find this interesting, and I'll start by, starting with what might be on top of mind for you, which is how is Pitt doing with regard to the pandemic? Many of you might be aware of how our approach has been sort of tailored this year, but let me start by sharing with you some of the same information that we're sharing with our students on a regular basis. In fact, you can access this information through coronavirus.pitt.edu. And this is our dashboard. Not quite the same thing as the famous Johns Hopkins dashboard, but specific to Pitt. And you'll see that when the students came back towards the end of September, we did in fact see a small increase in the number of cases. This was actually expected because students are coming in from all across the United States, all across the world, some from high-risk areas, some from low-risk areas, and then by being in close proximity with each other, we expected to see some transmission. That certainly happened, but our mitigation steps, having students live in small isolated groups called pods, our focus on masking and social distancing and hygiene, we have essentially reached an equilibrium now where the case rate on Oakland is quite low, averaging between 1 and 2 positive tests per day. For the faculty and staff, the case rate is much lower, essentially 0 with the occasional case coming in. We also, as part of our approach, constructed the university, kind of reinvented the way the university operates to respond to the risk posed by the virus. And the shorthand way of doing that was with what we call operational postures. Guarded being our sort of lowest risk or most permissive operating posture, moderate, and then high, corresponding, of course, to high risk and most restricted posture. The University of Pittsburgh, Oakland is sitting in the guarded or lowest posture right now as of this Monday. And our Greensburg, Titusville campuses are also in this posture. In Johnstown and in Bradford, we recently took those campuses from guarded back up to elevated in response to some recent cluster of positive cases. And much like we see in the data here, as that focus and those mitigation steps come into place, even after these outbreaks, we see a return to this lower case. So our approach here at the University of Pittsburgh is really to follow the medical advice. So this dashboard becomes a very important part of the heartbeat of our campus this year. And we watch it closely. Everyone's sort of asking, what is the operational posture going to be? Because everything adjusts to that in terms of online classes versus remote, how much in person, what kind of events can we have, and so forth. So our focus is very clear to our students and everyone. Adherence to strict mitigation, mask wearing works, social distancing works. These are the keys to keeping transmission low and to protecting the health and safety of everyone around us. The other thing we're doing, though, and the next slide shows this, is in addition to looking at those symptomatic positives, students feeling symptoms and getting tested, we also randomly sample the Pitt community to see what the prevalence is of the virus around the campus. And this graphic gives you a snapshot of what we've found from that. Our goal is to test 10% of the university population every semester, every month, and to have enough statistical accuracy to get a good feel for what's happening. And what you will see is that our overall positivity rate through surveillance testing is quite low, typically between 1/4 and 1/3%. And we believe that reflects the fact that overall the risk of the virus remains fairly low in our community. Now, as the United States begins to see the beginnings of a winter surge in cases, it'll be interesting to see how this compares in the region around us and whether it begins to affect our campus. So, but this gives you a nice feel for some of the things that we're looking at. Now, what you really probably want to know is, what is it like to be on the Pitt campus in the middle of a pandemic? So let me start with our move-in. It was obviously not the typical move-in, not only, of course, because of the masking, but and maybe this picture isn't the best example because she had a fair amount of stuff. We told students to pack light this year. I used to jokingly refer to it as camping at Pitt, because there's a lot of uncertainty. And if you have to go into isolation, or you have to experience a quarantine, or you have to change rooms, we wanted people to be as flexible as possible. The other thing that was a big part of this was, entrance to our buildings. And, we de-densified our campus and put scores of mitigation steps in to make sure that our interior environments were as safe as possible. And that means paying attention to things like indoor air quality, our ventilation systems, but also making sure that those entering our buildings have a need to be there so that the occupancy in the buildings is as low as possible, but also temperature checks and masks. So you see some of our students, and staff supporting that. The other big change, of course, is how we eat. This has been a big story for the whole country as we learn how do you dine and enjoy food and drink. That's the one occasion when it's obviously impossible to wear a mask. Our students have been, by and large, enjoying our new food service contract through delivery or through carry-out service. So another big part of the experience. Now that has changed this week as we moved from elevated to guarded risk, and so we're having a little bit more in-person dining this week than we've had thus far through the semester. Now, testing, as I said, is a big part of our experience. Surveillance testing means students get, selected at random and get an invitation to show up at one of our testing facilities. with instructions about how to do the supervised test. We have been able to develop, in partnership with UPMC, testing capability on the university campus. So we are able to get these results very quickly, generally within 24 to 36 hours, which is really essential to make sure that the information from the testing can be put to use right away, whether that's identifying a potentially positive individual or initiating contact tracing to identify those that might have been exposed. But, you know, it's really impossible for students to, it's impossible for any of us to live in total isolation, wearing a mask, not around anyone else. So one of the other new features of life at Pitt this year is the idea of a pod, and embracing outdoor activities, which you see here. Using the outdoor spaces as a way to provide that social outlet that all of us need, our students especially. We've really told our students that our green spaces are theirs for the use. That's why they're there. And they've been able to do that. Fortunately, the weather, as it is today, has been spectacular so far. Probably very unlike the fall weather you might have experienced when you were at Pitt years ago. So we've been really fortunate to have just a great fall weather, and it's been really helping us by providing that needed outlet in such a safe environment. The other thing we did for the students this year to sort of address that social need was introduce the idea of pods. A pod is essentially an artificial family or household. Much like in our own experience, wherever you're living, you end up sharing risk with a known group of either roommates or family members, where you can relax and not wear a mask. And of course, the deal is if you're in a situation like that, if somebody gets exposed, then it's quite likely that other members of your household or a pod are also going to be exposed. So students were sorted into pods as they arrived. And we tried to keep those pods at a small size so that if somebody in a member of that community did become infected, you know, the amount of risk being shared with others was limited. These two girls here, Sophie and Melanie, are roommates. In fact, they were close contacts of somebody who did end up testing positive for COVID-19. And so they quarantined together in their residence hall. And happily, they both tested negative in the end of this period. And, you know, one of the things that they did after this experience was, of course, these are nursing students. They shared their quarantine story on campus because they wanted their fellow students to know that this whole thing is less intimidating than you might think. They were especially excited that we gave them all the snacks that they could possibly want. But seriously, it's an encouraging sign that our students have really embraced the limitations that are upon them, but also some of the unique experiences that are here. So despite this, it really is turning out to be a very special time. Let me talk about the classroom environment and Flex at Pitt. Flex at Pitt is our fundamental approach to teaching this year. This also is a significant difference from the past, where most classes were based on, of course, in-classroom, in-person instruction. Flex at Pitt is what's called a high flex or hybrid model that incorporates classroom-based instruction and in-person professors, but it's augmented with technology such as video cameras, live streaming capability, so that faculty and students have the option to seamlessly move between in-person as it's allowed or allowable, or remote as they choose. And so that combination, which was an enormous amount of work to put together, we had to outfit all of our new classrooms, make sure that technology was there, provide that type of training. But what it's really allowing is a great agility on our part to adapt very quickly. Whether we're at guarded or elevated or even at high risk, we would be able to smoothly adjust how much in-person or remote. And the students and faculty, I think, are both enjoying the flexibility that they have. As individuals, the risk posed by this virus is very individualized. And so some people are sense or have more concerns about their own health risk if they were to get infected. this approach really lets them take that decision into their own hands and adapt their attendance and their participation as needed. So this is the way Pitt will look for the coming semester as well. You may know that our semesters have been compressed by taking out all of the short holidays that might be in a normal semester. We did that to remove the risk of travel on and off the campus, which is one of the highest risk activities. You saw that in the chart of positive cases. What it means for us this year is, the semester started, it's pretty much gone with just sort of one self-care day in the middle of the week, so that students are on the campus all the time until the very end, which for us will be just before the Thanksgiving holiday. We will then be sort of initiating the reverse process of when we came on campus with kind of a pre-departure quarantine or stay-at-home restrictions. And the goal there is to make sure students are going back home free of the virus. We don't want to put families at risk. Our spring semester too will be compressed. No spring break, but starting a little bit later and ending on time. So an unusual year on many fronts, but one that we're slowly accommodating and getting used to. Let me talk a little bit about athletics. It was a point of enormous uncertainty until I would say really the very last minute about whether collegiate athletics would proceed this year or not. But now that it's here and it's operating, and the extraordinary precautions that our athletics programs have taken to make sure our student athletes are free of infection and really posing little risk to the opposing team or their teammates, it is providing some of the real normalcy in this challenging term. And our student athletes are once again up to doing amazing things under the circumstances. I should note that the Pitt Panthers had a school record, 277 student athletes named to the ACC Academic Honor Roll last year. So we are simultaneously reaching new heights in the classroom as well as in their respective sports. Many of you probably know that Pitt soccer is undefeated and currently ranked #1 in the country, reaching this milestone really for the first time in men's soccer history. I think maybe third or fourth time overall for Pitt reaching that goal. So extraordinarily proud. Women's soccer is not far behind, having a fantastic season, leading the nation in total points, goals, and assists. And one of their players, Amanda West, is the nation's leading scorer. So we're incredibly excited about soccer on campus. Women's volleyball, which had such a spectacular season last year, winning its third consecutive ACC title, going undefeated last year at 18-0 and solidifying their position as one of the top programs in the country, will be playing tomorrow. And is quickly sort of resettling after some personnel changes. Wrestling was another program last year, reaching remarkable achievement, #8 in the country last year, with 7 of our Pitt Panthers qualifying for the NCAA championships. That sadly, and I mean quite sadly, was interrupted by the pandemic breaking out last spring, and so they did not get to travel for the NCAA championship. So we hope that doesn't happen again. The other question that a lot of people have in mind with regard to the pandemic is about enrollment. There's been a lot of news about will students come back? Will they stay at home? Will they take a gap year? And I would say nationally, when you look across this, it's very much a mixed picture. Some campuses are in fact seeing enrollment declines. But for the University of Pittsburgh, it's been a remarkably positive story. We've exceeded our recruitment goals in pretty much every category, with one exception, and that's our international students. That student population has been strongly affected by both travel restrictions and visa and other restrictions that have been put in place over the last year. So I'm really proud of this, and I think Pitt's reach across the United States continues to grow. We see strong interest and demand. You can see that Pennsylvania students, even though the number of Pennsylvania students is not really rising to a large extent just from demographics, but it continues to grow. Our out-of-state numbers continue to grow very strongly. And as a result, our campus becomes more diverse and dynamic each and every year. And once again, we've set a new record for the percentage of students from making up underrepresented minority groups. So, for example, our Black student population, the first year class is up 13%. Our Latinx, Latino, Latina students as a group which we've had significant gains in the last several years, continues to increase up 5% this year. And Pell recipients, which is a federal student aid program, which represents students with financial need, continues to grow as we have strengthened our financial aid. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But the other thing worth noting is not only the diversity and the geographic representation of our Pitt student body increasing each and every year, but it continues to become a higher and higher achieving class. The average GPA of our incoming class again went up this year, almost another percent. It's now over 4.40. So many of us alums look at that and wonder whether we would get into the university these days, but it's very exciting. Graduate and professional student enrollment is slightly down, and that's because that student population is much more impacted by our international decline. So why our domestic graduate and professional student population went up 3%, our international student population was down by 17%, almost 400 students. And so we just fell short of breaking even. So let me talk about the demographics. In a year when so much focus has been placed on the social mobility, the engine of opportunity that universities are supposed to provide, we have been looking closely at the diversity of our own student body, and it's been increasing steadily over the years. And this graph summarizes the fact that each and every year we've really grown the minority and underrepresented population in really all categories across the University of Pittsburgh. The other thing that we've done is, of course, so that means we're starting to look more like the overall population of the United States in many ways, and maybe a little bit less like the population demographics of Western Pennsylvania. Again, a very natural progression as Pitt becomes a leading national public university. So we've tried to be very transparent this year. So you'll see a lot of information about our diversity programs this year. We have a new dashboard, not only about the COVID virus, but about our demographics, our student population, our faculty and staff demographics, our diversity spend. And I hope you'll get a chance to look on our website and see some of that as we commit ourselves to being open and transparent about the progress we're making and holding ourselves accountable for progress. The other impact of COVID has been on our projects, our construction projects around campus. There are 4 projects, though, that are back underway. Our sort of front door, which is Bigelow Boulevard, sitting between the William Pitt Union and the Cathedral of Learning, has been closed for most of the spring semester. It is planned to open late this week or next week, so we're on the verge of reopening that. You'll see it includes both a pedestrian walkway, some constrainment of sort of traffic calming to slow down traffic in that area, but really to beautify it and integrate it with the modified planning on the William Pitt Union lawn there. Now, some of that is not going to be too pretty in the short term. Some of the concrete planters and other features have been delayed still by COVID, but we will be reopening that for pedestrian and vehicle traffic shortly. And by spring, by next fall, I expect it to be really quite beautiful. Hopefully, even in the spring, we'll begin to really reap the benefits. The other projects, of course, are the Allen Mcgee Scaife Hall expansion for our School of Medicine. This is where most of the medical teaching programs occur. The Peterson Sports Complex, home to Pitt's baseball, softball, soccer programs, and soon our lacrosse program. That's being expanded to accommodate lacrosse and the needs of these growing and dynamic programs. And then a project on Center Avenue at 5000 Bond Boulevard, which is home to some of the leading biomedical work coming right near the Hillman Cancer Institute. So we're excited about these projects. Much of our other construction plans have been paused during the pandemic, really for two reasons. One was to make sure that with all the financial uncertainty that we were facing at the outset of the pandemic, that we reserved as much cash and resources as possible to make sure that we didn't see unexpected losses. But the other reason, frankly, now is that financial emergency has settled down, I think, is really looking at how much of our capital planning and our facility needs are going to change based on our experience with the pandemic. Are we going to look at student housing needs differently as we've thought about, the safety of our living environment? What about office space and the demand for office space? So we're reevaluating that as part of our pause strategic planning activity, and hope to get back to the community with our revised thinking shortly this year. An integral part of a lot of these projects on construction has been sustainability. It's a vital part of Pitt's mission for a lot of reasons. It's the right thing to do as we face the environmental and sustainability challenges as a country and as a globe, but also because it's just good business for the university to address our cost of operations. And we continue to make real progress on that front this year. Last year, the university reached its lowest total energy use per square foot since we began tracking this measurement in 2008. Now, we did see some slowdown, of course, in energy use because of the pandemic. But as we have begun to open up the buildings, we anticipate we will remain on track to cut our overall building consumption by 50% by 2030. We've also started to diversify where we purchase power and looking at our renewable energy portfolio. We announced a new local solar purchase agreement earlier this year. And when you combine those kind of agreements together, we expect to be able that renewables will make up more than a third of our campus electricity by 2024. So all in, we're on track to reach our commitment for full carbon neutrality on the University of Pittsburgh campus by 2037, which would be Pitt's 250th anniversary. And another bit of good news this year, the Carnegie classification, which is recognition provided by the Carnegie Foundation for top research, top teaching and engagement universities. Pitt earned the Carnegie classification for community engagement in higher ed. This is the one of the most visible and prestigious recognitions of a commitment to a community engaged university. And I want to talk a little bit about one of the highlights of our recognition was our community engagement centers. 5 years ago, we announced an intention to partner with our local neighborhoods and communities to make sure there's a physical Pitt presence in those neighborhoods where we have strong collaborative partnerships, where either Pitt-based research programs or services or outreach, and where the community has been an active participant in our efforts. So we issued a letter of intent, and communities have been working with us to provide support. These are real partnership facilities. The community is participating. Pitt is participating. Many of you may know that we opened our first community engagement center in the Homewood neighborhood, and we expanded it last year, adding a 10,000-foot expansion, which was completed in March. This is a spectacular facility in the heart of Homewood, and with the new space, we can now serve thousands of community members annually. It's becoming a vibrant part of that community. It serves and supports 8 different schools of the university and their research programs, including our School of Health and Rehabilitation Services, our Department of Education, and others. The other noteworthy achievement this year was in the Hill District, as we announced that community engagement center will now have a physical home, as we recently committed to some of the construction cost for the permanent location of that CEC. in the Hill District's historic New Granada Theater. And that location, again, very vibrant, supporting multiple schools of the university and many community members, but quite interesting, very distinct from Homewood in the makeup. We'll have a digital inclusion center, a jazz studies program, a STEAM studio, which is not about steam as water vapor, but science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and a Center for African American Poetry and Poetics. So we're very excited about that development. Another update I wanted to provide to you has to do with our efforts to improve access and affordability to the University of Pittsburgh. 2020 happens to be the first full year under our Pitt Success Program. This was a Pell Match program and a financial aid restructuring that we announced in February of 2019, and it went into effect for the incoming class that fall. This was the largest restructuring of financial aid in the university's history. In its first year, it totaled about $27 million worth of cost, but all of that, of course, was being provided to students for financial aid. It provides a dollar-for-dollar match for federal Pell Grants, and it also addresses a large unmet need for a particular student if for some reason there's a large gap between what it cost and the financial aid they've received. The goals of that program were really threefold. One, to make sure that we could attract students here to the University of Pittsburgh and their choice of university was not overtly or unnecessarily impacted by affordability and access. Once they were here, we wanted them to stay here, and we didn't want them to have to leave the university prematurely because of concerns about costs. So this was to support retention. And of course, over the course of their academic stay here, that they would graduate, and we would address what has been a persistent gap between the graduation rate for Pell and non-Pell eligible students of the university. So with only 1 year under a belt, I can't talk about the graduation rate success, but let me talk a little bit about the retention rate improvement and our recruiting. So on the next graph, you will see a number that shows our first year enrollment between for our students who are Pell eligible, both for the Oakland campus here in Pittsburgh in yellow and for our regional campuses in blue. And for that first full year of the program, you will see that we had a significant increase in Pell eligible students, and that increase trend really continued for Pittsburgh, but fell back for the regional campuses. We think what's happening here is that the Pitt Success Program is successfully addressing a lot of the financial need, but for the regional campuses, which tend to draw more locally and where the Pell recipients have always made up a larger fraction of the student population, the downturn of the economy because of the pandemic has had a negative effect that has sort of overcome that effect. So we'll continue to watch the effect of this Pitt Success Program on enrollment. One bit of good news, though, is when we look at retention, you will see that, again, this is looking at the Pittsburgh campus on the left and the regional campuses on the right. And this is comparing 2 years. So the yellow or orange bar is showing before the program was put in place, and the blue is showing our preliminary numbers for the first full year of the program. And you will see that there was a difference in 2018 between the first to second year retention rate between Pell and non-Pell students. 94% of our non-Pell eligible students would come back, but only 86.9% of our Pell eligible. That difference has essentially disappeared in the first year of the program, and almost disappeared on the regional campuses despite the additional pressure there. So we feel really good about this. We think that this program is doing what we intended to do, which is addressing the need that was really keeping students from succeeding and staying and graduating at the University of Pittsburgh. Now, hopefully, if we can sustain this over the next 4 years, we will see the same results on our graduation rate and hopefully eliminate that difference between Pell eligible and non-Pell eligible students. The other big program we've had for access and affordability is our Panthers Forward program. This is now in its third year. We have gained national attention for this program It's a novel way of addressing the student debt problem. What it does is it essentially replaces borrowing or a balance in a student loan with an award or a grant up to $5,000 to reduce their federal student loan. Instead of having to pay it back as you would a loan, students instead pledge to pay it forward or become donors and to replenish that fund so that other students can have the same benefit that they had. For students, it's a very powerful idea. It feels like crowdsourcing, where young alumni, as they pay back into this program, are supporting other students just like them. And in fact, it's that connection between students and alumni that's one of the most powerful parts of the program, as we combine students with young alumni as mentees and have them forge relationships and even networking opportunities to support our Pitt students as they graduate and move on. So our newest class will actually be announced later today, and we're really excited about our Panthers Forward program. And I hope some of you will take a look about how you can participate or support this program that's generating so much interest. Speaking of giving, our Pitt Day of Giving, which is our traditional day of really focusing on ways that we as alumni and members of the Pitt family can show our support and our alumni pride, is this February 23rd. Let me talk a little bit about last year's. It's obviously a fundraising event, and we did raise $1.7 million last year. But what it really does is it brings in a lot of interest and a lot of first-time activity, something we're incredibly proud of. Almost 10,000 donors participated from all across the United States, from 31 different countries, 6 continents. The increase in donors and alumni donors and faculty and staff donors was up sharply. Our social media presence was outstanding. We were the #1 trending topic in Pittsburgh that day. And we hope that despite the COVID, we will outperform even those incredible achievements this year. So it's a great way to, no matter what you can support, to just show your pride, pick a program that you love. There's a lot of contests. Celebrate your roots, check in, and let us hear from you as well as you support us on PDOG, our Pitt Day of Giving 2021. So mark your calendars for that. The other bit of pride, of course, is in our external reputation. There's a lot to be proud of here. In fact, there's so much I'm not even going to try to read it. I'll ask you to look through and find your school and program. But across all of the schools of the university, we have a lot of reason to celebrate. We continue to be the #1 public university in the Northeast, having reached that title 5 of the last 6 years. Our research presence continues to grow and expand. NIH was 6th this year. You probably recall in past years we've been up at that 5-6 bracket now in a sustained way. We may be back up at 5 this year. That's very dependent on some of the large projects. We have top programs globally in specific programs, and I think you can see some of the #1s that we're so proud of, both in education and physical therapy and our international global policy, among others. So kudos to everybody. And, as a Pitt degree holder myself, it just makes me feel like my Pitt degree is appreciating in value each and every year as we continue to reach out and extend our remarkable reputation. One of the areas of success that I find most compelling, maybe the most important of all, is to measure our success through the lives of our students, those that went through Pitt. And certainly that includes our students. So we had 14 students named Fulbright Scholars this year. That is a new record. The previous tie for the University of Pittsburgh was 11, and Pitt already was one of the top Fulbright producers in the United States. In fact, we've been named a top Fulbright producing university 9 of the last 10 years. So it's a remarkable track record with one of the most well-known and notable international awards. Catherine Fletcher was also named a 2020 Harry S. Truman Scholar. Let me tell you how unique that is. There are only 62 such scholars named in the United States each year. She's the 13th Truman Scholar from Pitt history in Pitt. And Thyrell Tunin was awarded the 2020 Beinecke Scholarship, another rare and prestigious honor. There's only 20 Beinecke Scholarships each year, and a university can only nominate one student. But for 4 straight years, a Pitt student has been named a Beinecke Scholar. Our faculty as well, it's been a great year. One of the highest recognitions a faculty member, particularly in the sciences, the arts, and medicine can achieve is election to the National Academies. And so this year, 2 who were elected to the National Academy of Medicine, Torrin Finkel, who leads our Aging Institute, is one of the leading age experts in the world studying the molecular basis of age and age-related diseases and identifying ways for anti-aging therapy, something we're all, and I find myself increasingly interested in. And also Amy Wagner, pioneering a strategy for predicting how patients recover from brain injury and using that data to actually affect and change clinical decisions along the way, something she calls personalized rehabilitation medicine. So we're incredibly proud of these 2 newest members of the National Academy of Medicine. The other academy is the National Academy of Sciences, and our very own Yvette Bahar is chair of our Department of Computational Biology in the School of Medicine. She was elected this year as well. And Graham Hatfield, elected to the National Academy of Arts and Sciences. Graham, you may recall his work last year, which received a lot of media attention, where he was teaching undergraduates to discover new viruses called bacteriophages, and it actually led to a therapy for a very sick girl and her cure. So it was really remarkable. That cocktail of genetically engineered viruses that was used to treat the antibiotic-resistant infection in a 15-year-old lung transplant patient. So something that was remarkable. So again, our congratulations to Yvette and Graham. And then on the leadership side, we have welcomed 2 new deans. Carissa Slatterback is the new dean of our Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. She just started, I believe, about a week ago or a couple weeks ago. She is an expert in urban planning, and we're really excited to have her here in Pittsburgh and to take that great school to new heights. And of course, Anantha Shekhar, our new Senior Vice Chancellor for the Health Sciences, and also our Peterson Dean of the School of Medicine. Anantha has replaced Art Levine, joining us this June. And as you might imagine, as we were in the middle of a pandemic, has jumped in to an incredibly busy and dynamic agenda, supporting the university directly in our pandemic response, but also working with UPMC and all of our health sciences to advance one of the largest research enterprises in the university. So we want to welcome Carissa and Anantha. Speaking of research, another new record for the University of Pittsburgh this year. We are now approaching $1 billion in research expenditures. It won't be very far away if we continue this growth path, and we have no reason to expect that we won't break a new record again this year. We are one of the top funded research institutions in the country. And the lion's share of that funding is from federally funded grants, which are competitively awarded. So as I always say, this is as good a measure as you can have as how good our faculty are. They are competing through a peer review on these competitive grants to fund this research. And it's really spectacular to see that going. One of the focal points for the university will be, of course, looking at some of this non-federal funding opportunities and see if we can look at ways to grow that as well. I wanted to focus a little bit, just because of the nature of a health emergency, that our health sciences research always gets a lot of attention, but that's been particularly true this year. In a year where a pandemic, social strife, questions of race, police reform, social justice, it's been remarkable to see how our own faculty have been called upon as some of the leading voices to the whole world to address questions about vaccines and police reform, and we've pulled a few segments to give you a little example of some of our own faculty in the news this year. I hope you'll enjoy this.
Major research happening right now in our area. The University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine is now seeking approval from the FDA for a candidate vaccine.
It looks like a small piece of Velcro. It's officially called a microneedle array.
There are some similarities between the current uprisings and earlier moments in our nation's history.
You can be a radical and be peaceful. You can be an extremist and be peaceful.
Use of force experts like David Harris and Scott Defoe seem to be in agreement on this one.
David Harris, a professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. David, thanks so much for your input for us here at TRT World.
Carl Kurlander spent 10 years researching and co-producing a documentary about polio.
With polio, there was really no effective treatment. So it was really a sense of helplessness, probably like we're feeling today with coronavirus.
At the University of Pittsburgh Center for Vaccine Research, they're specifically working on the coronavirus vaccine right now.
Paul Dupre, who holds the Jonas Salk Chair and heads the Center for Vaccine Research at the University of Pittsburgh, says the march of history gives today's scientists an advantage. Now, Dr. Dupre, who's trying to adapt the measles vaccine to combat the coronavirus, is one of scores of researchers around the world all working toward the same goal.
Competition is something which drives innovation, but there's another C. We need to be collaborative. And that's not just colleagues in the United States, that's colleagues all over the world.
So I hope you take some pride in that. You know, as I've often said, a great university is not an ivory tower somehow separate from the rest of the world. A great university is sitting in the turbulence of the moment, dealing with the most important questions we're facing. And time again this year, as we faced a year unlike any other, with enormous questions, global questions, societal questions, some of the hardest questions facing our nation, our country, our society, and our globe, it's been a point of great pride to see our own Pitt faculty called upon for their expertise, their insights, and I certainly expect that to continue. I also want to acknowledge, in the midst of a pandemic, the heroism, we certainly feel that's what they are, of our alumni. Over 330,000 strong, each contributing in their own ways according to their own expertise and their own gifts. But again, under extraordinary times, called to do extraordinary things. And so we've been so proud to read the stories that reach us, the messages that reach us about your achievements during this time, your contributions at this time, those acts, large and small, of kindness and support that are addressing, again, a time of great human need. You know, one example is a Pitt alumnus, a veteran who volunteered to staff a COVID testing site in Tennessee, or a graduate from our School of Nursing who was deployed to a COVID hotspot through his Air Force Reserves unit, and others from our School of Social Work addressing some of the enormous needs of our seniors, our children, and others struggling with mental health issues during the pandemic. And there's thousands of these stories. And so I wanted to recognize the incredible contributions that you are making at a time of just great need. And let me just finish with a few reflections on this remarkable year. When you think about what makes a university great, and I've tried to brag about Pitt in all of the different ways today, our reputation, our enrollment, our faculty achievements, our student achievements, what you realize in the end is that a university is not so much about the buildings or the place. It's not even so much about its traditions or its brand. It's really about its people. It's a story about exceptional people coming together to work together, contribute together, support each other, and to advance the frontiers of knowledge. And here's a year where everything we thought we knew how to do was disrupted by a global pandemic. And it would have been easy to sort of, hunker down and try to wait for it to be over. But instead, the Pitt community, all of you, all of us here on campus, have really rallied to do remarkable things and relearn our craft, relearn the way we teach, the way we learn, the way we do research, the way we operate a campus, the way we Zoom from home. And I cannot express enough gratitude to the members of the University of Pittsburgh for their resilience, their ingenuity, their hard work, despite all of the stress, despite the fact that, like anyone, this pandemic never seems to go away. It's with us all the time. It is a real privilege to work alongside so many exceptional people here at the University of Pittsburgh, and I hope you feel the same way too. So on that note, I want to thank you for your attention. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll look forward to answering a few of your questions before we run out of time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chancellor Gallagher. You certainly shared many, many points of pride with all of us. And it's really encouraging to see how Pitt is able to move forward despite all the challenges that are currently happening in this world. So not surprisingly, I know you shared a lot of information about how Pitt is persevering through the pandemic, but I wanted to ask some questions that our audience members had shared regarding how we're dealing with COVID. So in the experience with virtual classes, if the experience with virtual classes is positive, would Pitt support keeping this option in the future?
Yeah, I think, no one wanted to sort of completely learn how to use digital remote learning technology in 1 week, like we were forced to do last spring. But now that we've gone through the pain and the investment and the learning curve of doing that, it's clear that this is now a new tool in our toolbox. And I don't think we put it back. I think it becomes integrated into what we're doing. I don't think it's necessarily going to replace the power of in-person learning. Our students clearly wanted to be here. That's why they came back. There is a special form of learning that comes through experience, that working with your peers in a classroom, visiting a professor, being in a laboratory, being in a clinical environment. Those are hard to replicate online, but there's clearly a lot of ways in which this online works better than we thought. And in many environments, it's a great way to learn and to teach and even to interact. So I think it becomes part of life. The difference will be we don't have to do it. We'll do it because we want to do it.
Great, thank you. And then related to testing and treatment, is testing and diagnosis free to members of the campus community? And what about COVID-related treatment and service costs? So medications, hospitalizations, and et cetera.
So the testing has been free to the community. That in fact is a not insignificant part of our COVID-related costs, but we felt it was important that if testing is an essential tool you have to identify those that might have the virus and to isolate and protect everybody else, that's just part of operating a safe environment. So we have to provide that, just like we provide all the masking and other types of tools that people need to work safely in this new environment. With regard to hospitalization, I will say, fortunately, we have not really had any serious health impacts to those affected so far by the virus. Now, that's a little bit of a knock on wood because the variability of how sick somebody can become when they're infected, of course, is very large, right? All the way from no symptoms at all to severely sick. But we've been very fortunate so far that way. And once you get into medical care, it also becomes part of insurance issues and other things. So for our faculty and staff, we've made sure that there's sort of seamless coverage for them, and certainly we're sitting in the middle of one of the great academic medical centers of the country, the largest academic medical center in the country. And we wanted our community to enjoy that benefit. For students, many of whom have insurance and other things from their families, we've worked very hard to make sure that there's no gap and that there's no barrier for a student who happens to be here who gets sick, to make sure that we can get them immediately into the best clinical environment possible with no concerns about insurance at all. That certainly should be reassuring to parents here, that if somebody does get sick, you probably can't be in a better place in the country in terms of getting the very best care and support. And we wanted to make sure there were no concerns about that.
Great, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about how Pitt's done balancing revenues and costs due to the pandemic?
Well, as a nonprofit, you have no choice but to balance revenues and costs. So that's a big part of what we're doing. I would say the hardest part of that task has been uncertainty. Not all of the costs are known, just because nobody has a working crystal ball on exactly what we'll face with this pandemic. But we were able to sort of reasonably plan and do contingency planning and identify a whole range of costs. Our goal, of course, was to offset as much as possible those costs with savings. Again, this is such a disrupted time that many of the costs we're facing are one-time in nature, right? Modifying a classroom, providing testing, new equipment. That's not something that's going to be an ongoing part of our budget. Similarly, though, we've not been traveling. A lot of our normal activities have been curtailed, so we're not buying supplies the way we used to. And so we are, saving money while we're spending money. And our first objective was to try to offset directly that way. In some cases, by the way, that's about $45 million worth of offset. So it's a very sizable effect. And then, if we have costs that exceed that, we have working reserves that were specifically set aside to cover those. A good example of that is, we leased a lot of the hotel space in the Oakland area so that we could provide all the residents, housing to meet demand while not being in high occupancy residence halls. So our de-densification was accomplished by going out and adding residence halls, if you will, by leasing out whole hotels. That was a pretty significant cost. By the way, a very welcome one to the hotel industry, which has been hit so hard by this pandemic. But in that case, we had reserves to deal with some of this. So I would say on that front, we've been very fortunate. We have not had to resort to layoffs or furloughs or reductions of that type. I do think that going forward, the financial crisis that higher education is going to face is becoming increasingly clear. It's not going to be a short-term acute crisis for most universities, but we are probably facing years of very tight budgets and constraints. The state budget's under enormous pressure as they've borne the cost of the pandemic. Some of these costs are going to sort of play out over a slower period of time. And of course, most of all, so many families have been hurt economically by the economic downturn associated with the pandemic. And so the amount of financial aid that we need to offer to support those families is going to remain high, I think, for the foreseeable future. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, it's not that there hasn't been a lot of cost. In many ways, this is one of the largest cost shocks that the university has faced, but we were in a very strong position to manage it. So I think that means we can spread it out. We're not going to be in any kind of existential threat where the university's, at risk by this. And I will say that's important because I think there will be some universities and colleges across the country who are facing a much bleaker, situation. But I think you can feel good about our ability to withstand these uncertain times.
Thank you. And shifting gears a little bit, can you talk about what you see as the biggest area of opportunity for the university over the next 5 years?
Yeah, the crystal ball question. And I did preface this earlier saying nobody has a working crystal ball, and I don't either. So you should take my answer with a little bit of a grain of salt. There's a lot of aspects to that question that I think are really interesting. One, we touched on, which is the role of technology. We've completely disrupted how universities do what they do. Some of that will have lasting effects. That'll be really interesting. A lot of innovation and a lot of new things. Similarly, the financial crisis, that uncertainty is going to create responses, whether it's government programs to support students, whether it's just innovation in universities, whether it's new ways of providing an education. That's going to be interesting. But I think one of the most interesting things, one of the biggest opportunities for us, is that we've just experienced a pandemic that is socially transmitted, and its biggest disruption has been to our interaction with each other, to social things. The value of higher education, of a university education, has always kind of gone back and forth between it's good for society, it's good for us collectively to have people who have attained more education, who can work together and contribute to our economy and the well-being of our society, and also this is about the good to an individual. This is about you advancing your own interest in getting a job, your own economic well-being. And I think what's happening now is that where the pendulum had been very far over on the individual good side, it's now swinging pretty fast to how do universities serve this societal good? And whether that's our research programs tackling the real societal issues of the day, what are the big, tough questions that we need to solve? And that points to team-based and collaborative science and doing things at larger scale, or whether that's ensuring that the economic opportunity and the social mobility that a college degree gives you is available to everybody. And we start focusing more on who's coming out of the universities rather than how elite people are being selected coming in. So that, I think, is going to redefine what success is for a university and how we're measured. It will be a little bit disruptive as it's kind of resettling, but there's a lot of opportunity there because it forces us to go to our mission. A university is about making the world a better place through knowledge. And I think anytime the disruption points you back to your core mission, that's a huge opportunity.
Great, thank you. And shifting gears again, and I know I get a lot of questions from alumni about this, especially since this summer. But I was hoping you could talk about how Pitt has responded to issues of race and social justice, especially since this summer.
Well, as you know, I kind of foreshadowed part of my answer in the last question. I think as a society, the inequality and the effects of race on our nation's history, on economic opportunity, on the fairness of our judicial system, our police system, these are some of the biggest questions we face as a society. And I think what we saw this summer with these cases of police brutality sort of surging into public awareness and creating this new dynamic isn't that the problems were new, it's just that they rose back to our attention, and we had the opportunity to step back and really identify that these are some of the biggest challenges we face. So again, my starting point is always that a great university leans into that. We should embrace those kind of questions because that's what we're here for, to contribute. And I think as the discussion has evolved since the summer, and listening to our students, listening to our faculty, listening to our staff, and listening to our alumni, I think that the opportunities have fallen in sort of three major buckets. One of them, interestingly, is ourselves. We can be a better university than we are. And I'm not saying that to be critical of the University of Pittsburgh. We're a great place. But we don't have to drink our own Kool-Aid. There's ways in which we have failed to live up to our own ideals in big ways and little ways. And I think there's a real opportunity and a willingness and acceptance for us to, again, just do better. Our hiring, our diversity, how inclusive we are, addressing problems that arise in a better way, kind of the very best of what Pitt can be. And so there's a whole set of things that are about making Pitt a better university for everybody that's here. The other two buckets, though, are also very important. One of them is a university is not an ivory tower. It's an extension of the community that it's part of. And I say that with a little grain of salt since we actually have an ivory tower. But we're all very proud of how Pitt was part of the Pittsburgh Renaissance, that this incredible transformation of Pittsburgh from a city of heavy manufacturing and steel to one of education and eds and meds and high tech has been based on the University of Pittsburgh and other universities like CMU. So we have clearly transformed this region. We really believe in a deep way our power for that transformation. But it's also equally true that that benefit has not fallen to everybody. And in fact, some of the very neighborhoods of Pittsburgh, in fact, neighborhoods in the immediate shadow of the Cathedral of Learning have been some of the most left behind in that economic transformation. And some of the largest inequalities in education, in even health outcomes, are in Pittsburgh communities that are right next to us. And I think it's actually an indictment on a university that if you're in the same zip code as the university, there should be a benefit. And I think it's causing us to look at our neighborly responsibilities. How do we engage with the communities around us to help them participate in all the things all the benefits that we provide? And sometimes that's about listening to them and providing services. In many cases, it's about, working with them, where we hire, where we do business as a university. We're a big institution. So we're looking at how do we get much more intentful about our neighborhood responsibilities. And then finally, it's our mission. As I said, this is one of the great challenges of our time. Questions of race have been with us since before Pitt was founded. And that doesn't make them acceptable. And it's going to take thinking, and it's going to take scholarship, and it's going to take new leaders. It's going to take our students and our faculty. And I think we have to, again, lean into that with our courses, our classes, our programs. Who can go to Pitt? Who do we recruit to teach at Pitt? So that, we are part of that from a mission perspective. So I think it's all the way from us as a university, all the way out to the whole world. And it's really that breadth that makes this really so fascinating, real interesting. And again, it's been traumatic. I mean, it's been a very difficult time for many, and it's become very contentious. It's become very difficult for many people to talk about, but it's one that, again, we need to lean in and be a contributor and hopefully use this as the catalyst to make those kind of deep impressions that we can look back and say we've made a difference.
Thank you. Yes, I know our alumni are very interested in hearing any progress that the university makes, and they're very excited to want to be part of this process as well. So thank you for that. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I'll ask one final question. I'm sure you get a lot of questions about athletics as much as I do. So let's ask, what is the status of the athletics complex that will be built next to the Pete and other aspects of Victory Heights?
Well, Victory Heights. So we're excited about Victory Heights. Obviously, the university has some outstanding athletics programs that have no home, or whose home is 75 years old and doesn't have an air conditioner, right? Our world-class volleyball program is a good example. Victory Heights is going to happen. Fundraising is actually underway. The announcement we made about the vision for Victory Heights is still there. And in fact, I would say on the planning side, it's all proceeding. What has happened in the very near term is that it was part of the pause we did as we stopped to look at which projects will proceed. Do we need to protect some of these assets as we navigate the uncertainty of COVID? As I said, that's really a one-time process to kind of reevaluate. And I think as this year continues to unfold, by the time we start next academic year, I think most of those deadlines and milestones will be reset. And I think Victory Heights will be, again, back on track to proceed. So we're excited about that. It's something that's really needed here. To be honest, I think Victory Heights has been mostly impacted by other projects that needed to happen first. There were utility projects. There's the new rec center that we badly need for all of our students. And some of those work best if they happen before Victory Heights. So we're anxious to sort of put everything back in order and get things moving again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chancellor Gallagher. Thank you again for your time and for your candor. There's certainly a lot of really wonderful things happening at the university, and I know it means so much to our alums to hear it directly from you. Thank you, everyone, our audience, for joining us today and for sharing your questions. You know that I won't let you get away without promoting some of our other Stay at Homecoming events. So I hope that some of you will be returning tonight for our Panthers Under 30 Rock Talks event. It's a live conversation with a few of our outstanding recent alumni. And don't forget to join us tomorrow at noon for our Chalk Talk. 3 former Pitt Panthers, Doran Dickerson, Sam Clancy, and Lusaka Polite, will be online to preview Saturday's homecoming game versus Notre Dame and answer your questions. So thanks again for joining us today. Be safe, be well, and hail to Pitt.